And this is not just the Victorian times. It was before Victorian times, and it is well even today. Women are judged for things they wear. Women are judged for the smiles they give. Hello and welcome back to NibblePop. Today in this video, we are going to look at a very exceptional poem, My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. This poem is categorized as a dramatic monologue. In this video, we are going to first look at Browning a little bit, his context, the poem itself, and then speak about the different issues and themes that we come across in this poem. Don't skip any part of this video, because after you watch this video, you will not only have a great grip on this poem, but also will be able to face any kind of exam questions, be it long or short. And if you like this video, then do subscribe to our channel and turn on that notification icon so that every time a new video comes up, you get notified. This is Monami Mukherjee. Welcome once again. It was in the year 1812, the month of May, that Robert Browning was born. As he was growing up, he didn't get much of a formal education, but his home had a great library which was kept by his father, and he grew up with a vast knowledge about different things. By the age of 17, he chose to be a poet by profession. It was around the year 1838 that he decided to go away from England to Italy and start publishing his own books. This was the time, sometime around 1842, that he published a book called Dramatic Lyrics, where he experimented with the form of poetry and mixed it up with ideas from drama. The poem that we are going to look at, My Last Duchess, belongs to this book, and after 2 years, a great thing happened in his life. He came across some beautiful poems by a woman called Elizabeth Barrett. He fell in love with this woman, and she was suffering a lot. She was a very weak person, and they had a long courtship, and that was a very enriching experience for both of them. Eventually, they got married, but they had to get married in secret because Elizabeth's father did not approve of the match. Perhaps because Browning was only a poet, and that did not promise a great future, and maybe that person was apprehensive that this man is not going to look after my daughters, and he was so apprehensive that he himself stopped every connection with his daughter after her marriage. They settled down in Italy. It was the most productive time of their lives. Both of them wrote, and Elizabeth Barrett was very popular, and her love lyrics, they are amazing. Maybe someday we will do some poems by Elizabeth Barrett. They had a very strong, emotionally stable relationship. A son was born to them in 1849, and he was named Robert Barrett Browning. Nice. What is nicer is that they used to call their son by the name of Ben. That was his nickname. But this rosy domestic picture fades out in 1861 when Elizabeth dies. She had gained much of her strength. She had even recovered a lot from her illness during her life with Browning, but she died in 1861. Browning came back to England, and he started editing and publishing the works that were written by his wife. After his return to England, he was honored by Oxford. He was getting more and more popular, and eventually, when he died in 1889, by the time Browning was pretty famous. But when he started writing, he did not get the kind of fame which he should have got, as per my estimate. What kind of a world was that? The time around 1840s. Historically, we consider that as the Victorian age in England. Victorian age because Queen Victoria was the Queen of England from 1837 up to 1901. So this span is called the Victorian age. Although different kinds of poems were written during this time, and it's not okay to categorize them as one kind of poem, which we can safely do with romantic poets. Like they wrote one kind of poem. With Victorian poetry, we cannot categorize them as one kind of poem. So there was a variety. This age was mostly an age of novels. You have writers like Charles Dickens and then Thomas Hardy and Thackeray, George Eliot. Don't confuse her with Thomas T.S. Eliot. Okay, T.S. Eliot is modern age American poet. So this was a time for the novels. Politically, this was a time when England was gaining a lot of strength in its colonies. Okay, this was the time when everything was rosy for the colonial master, England. They were gaining ground in India and Asian countries and Africa. So this was the time when England was at its peak of prosperity. Industries were growing, science was developing, and that had some consequences on religion to a lot extent, morality to a lot extent, and humanity in general. People were confused about things like what is God, which rituals to have faith in, about origin of man. So in a way we can say this was an age of crisis and this was an age of exuberance. It was an age of great prosperity. And people had to make certain choices, certain compromises. You get a lot of riches, but you get poor when it comes to the peace of mind. Life was getting complicated, and it was going to be far more complicated in the next century, especially after the world wars. But this was the beginning of the end, you can say. If you have already watched my video on Dover Beach, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't watched that, go back to Dover Beach after you finish this. You can also watch the video on Goblin Market. All these were different kinds of poems that were being written during the Victorian times. But mostly, Tennyson was looming large over the horizon. Tennyson is an extremely magnificent lyricist, but somehow he suffers badly from, you can say, a hangover from the Romantic age. He kind of goes on recreating what he thinks as a continuation of the Romantic age. Tennyson was instantly famous. He was the poet laureate. He was the epitome of English poetry in Victorian times. Browning the nation was not probably ready for something like Browning, okay, because Browning became more popular after his death during the modern times, and now he's quite famous. Browning brought to English poetry what was never there before. It was called something called, psychological realism. A great departure from the romantic idealism of Wordsworth, even from the kind of realism that we see sometimes in Shelley and Coleridge. He takes away all kinds of idealism. And above everything else, he establishes a different way of writing poetry, a way in which the poet disappears. We will talk at length about how this happens after we finish reading the text. When we look at this poem, My Last Duchess, it has a context of its own. The form which Browning uses here is the form of the dramatic monologue. From the phrase dramatic monologue, you can understand two things. One, it is a monologue. Monologue is when a speaker is speaking alone. Mono means one, and log means any kind of speech. So when a speaker is speaking all by himself or herself, there may be a listener, there may not be a listener, but when there is only one person speaking, it's a monologue. So this poem is basically a speech by one person. Why dramatic? Because this speaker is caught in a dramatic moment. There is a kind of a physical action that we can guess from the words he or she is speaking, and the whole situation kinds of brings out a lot of details about the character of the speaker. Another important aspect about Browning's dramatic monologues is that we have a listener, somebody who is listening to this monologue, and this listener does not speak back because it's a monologue. You cannot have two people talking, then it would be a dialogue. So this listener is kind of a representative, silent, receiver of whatever words are thrown at him or her, and he works like the readers. It's like the readers are also listening to the monologue in the same way that the silent listener is listening. Now, Browning is inspired by a true Renaissance crime story where there is this Duke of Ferrara, his name is Alfonso II, and his wife's name was Lucrezia. Now, Lucrezia, she died suspiciously under suspicious circumstances. She was married at 14, she died at 17. And this Duke of Ferrara eventually remarried. He had multiple wives. We do not have any names mentioned in the poem. And somehow that kind of turns this poem into a more universal one. Like this is the story of Alfonso, and at the same time it is not the story of just one person. So who do we see here? What kind of a person do we see here? So let's just jump straight into the text. You have the word Ferrara in the beginning. It's a location. It's the place where this poem is taking place. Usually we do not have any location tags in case of poems. We have location tags or setting in case of drama. The beginning of scenes, we have the location mentioned by the playwright. Here, this starts with that kind of a style where he is mentioning the place in which this poem is taking place. That's my last touches painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. The Duke, he is talking to someone. Now, who is this someone? The Duke is talking to a messenger who has come from a different place, and he is showing him a portrait of his wife, ex-wife, who is now dead. That's my last touches painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder. So if you just read it in a simple way, it would mean that this is the picture of my wife painted on the wall. Maybe it's directly painted on the wall, or maybe it's a portrait hanging on the wall. And he says that it's a beautiful piece of work. It's a piece of wonder. Now, Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day. Fra Pandolf, he is the painter, and he worked very hard all day to create this painting. And there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? And then he wants this messenger to, sit and watch this portrait while he speaks about it. Okay, so he sits. So you see, the presence of the listener is established here. We know that somebody is actually there with the Duke. He's not just speaking in a soliloquy. Soliloquy is where a person speaks all by himself or herself and there is nobody else present. That's a soliloquy. Monologue is where there is a person who can hear what you are saying. That's a monologue. In a way, soliloquy is also a monologue because there's only one person speaking, but soliloquy is a special kind of monologue. Here we have a monologue where we have this person listening to the Duke. So the Duke wants him to sit down. I said, Fra Pandolf, by design. By design means deliberately. I wanted to mention the name to you. And why does he mention the name of the artist? For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. Such a long sentence. Let's break it up into parts. He is trying to tell the listener why he is mentioning the name of the painter. So he says, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance. Never before has anybody seen that picture and not asked me how come she is having that kind of an expression. The depth and passion of its earnest glance. There is a certain kind of depth and passion in that look that the Duchess is giving in the painting. And when somebody has that kind of look in a painting or in a photograph, what does it mean? It means that when a person is smiling in a special way and a photo is clicked, it means that the photographer has something to do with it. You have a special connection with the photographer. The model has a special connection with the painter. And then the model gives that kind of an expression which is captured by the painter. So the Duke is very conscious that there is a special kind of expression on the face of his wife, and anybody who sees that picture or painting is going to ask him, why is your wife looking with such intensity at the painter? And then he goes on to say that that's why I'm mentioning the name of the painter, and I'm also going to tell you about it. Since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. Now, whenever anybody has this question in their minds that there must be something going on between this woman and this painter. Why is she looking like that? Okay, how come the painter get to see these expressions which he has painted? Then the Duke says that it is always in his presence that people look at that portrait and they are too afraid to ask him directly this question. So they don't dare to ask him this, but he knows what's going on in their minds. He knows they want to ask this question. And so he answers, Fra Pandolf painted it. And he really worked hard for it. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus, Sir, it was not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess' cheek. So, you might feel that this woman could look at somebody with this kind of expression even in the absence of her husband, because only then the painter could have seen such expressions. And then the Duke is going on imagining the situation where the painter must have said something flirtatious to her, or given her a compliment, or given her some comment which made her smile or look in a seductive way, which he painted on the portrait. Okay. So when he uses the word spot of joy, it means maybe the blush in the cheeks, which is like a spontaneous reaction. It's not deliberate. So there is a special kind of blush, a special kind of expression on the face of the Duchess, which he is talking about. And he's talking about his dead wife, by the way. Okay, so what are the things that Fra Pandolf, the painter, could have said? Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Mantle is this cloak, so it has these long sleeves. Maybe the painter had told her that please put the sleeve a bit up to show more of your wrist. these things bring kind of blushing responses from the woman whom he is painting, because she feels flattered that, okay, he wants to see more of my skin. All right. And then what else he says, or he would have said, paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Oh, your throat has such a wonderful skin tone that my paint cannot even begin to give justice to it. No, I can't paint you the way you are. That is the best compliment. Okay, so these are the things which must have been said to the Duchess by the painter, which made the Duchess smile at him in a way which was very seductive and suggestive, and the painter could paint those expressions beautifully. All right, such stuff was courtesy. The Duke knows that the painter was not seriously flirting with his wife. The painter was just being courteous. Okay, he was just being good to her. But she thought and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. But the reaction was that expression on her face. Right? She had heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. You just give her a little bit of compliment and she will start blushing and laughing and smiling at you. So, well, she was very easy to please. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. She looked at everything, and whatever she looked at, she started smiling at that. It was all one. I mean, it's okay to smile, but you should have degrees of intensity, according to the Duke. The Duke feels that when she is smiling at the Duke, she should smile in a more jovial way, more enthusiastic way, and she should not smile at others with same kind of intensity. That is the Duke's logic, good logic. It was all one. My favor at her breast, maybe he had given her a flower which she kept as a corsage, or any kind of gift that he had given. She used to smile, of course, in appreciation of it. But the dropping of the daylight in the west, the sunset, this woman smiled at the sunset. The bough of cherries, some officious fool broke in the orchard for her. Maybe she was walking in the garden and some foolish person wanted to impress her and broke a branch of cherries for her. She would smile. The white mule she rode with round the terrace, she smiled. So when she was riding a horse, she smiled. So the Duke has a problem that is very weird. His problem is that his wife smiled at the sunset. His wife smiled when she was having a ride on a pony. And, when somebody brought her a branch of cherries. In the last case, we can understand that there is at least a human being involved here. Maybe this Duke is jealous of the person who is bringing the branch of cherries. Fine with that. But with sunset and horse rides, this Duke is jealous because his wife smiled, enjoyed herself when she was looking at a sunset, when she was riding a horse. This means that he hated every time she smiled without him being the reason of smiling. It didn't matter whether she was smiling at an inanimate object or whether she was smiling at a human being. That smile was a crime which was not directed at him or because of him. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech. She would get so happy and approving anytime something like this happened, or blush at least. She thanked men. I mean, if somebody helped her in any way, maybe held her hand or just offered some help, she would thank men. Good. Okay, it's okay to thank men, but thanked somehow, I know not how. He can't explain himself even. He can't justify himself completely, but he's trying to justify the kind of disapproval which he felt for his wife. So he's saying, I don't know why or how, as if she ranked my gift, a 900 years old name, with anybody's gift. So with that branch of cherries, she gave that same kind of happy smile which she gave me. And what gift was I giving her? I was giving her the gift of aristocracy, a name, a family name. And for her it was all same, because her reactions were same. Who would stoop to blame this sort of trifling? He could have told her that don't do these things, I am not liking these things. But he thinks that if he told her anything, that would be stooping, that would be below his dignity, talking about these stupid things. Why should I have to tell my wife not to smile at others? She should actually understand it on her own. Even had you skill in speech, if you could speak well, even then, which I have not, he doesn't have any skill of speech, but he's going on talking in a huge monologue here. He thinks he doesn't know how to speak. To make your will quite clear to such an one and say, so if you could speak, I cannot speak well, but if I could speak well, even then I couldn't tell her that, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. You're crossing the line there. I couldn't tell her. And if she let herself be lessened so, maybe if I would have said, she would have corrected herself, lessened herself, not plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse. Even then would be some stooping. So I didn't want to argue with her on this. I didn't want to instruct her so that she can correct herself. That would be like stooping, bending low. So that would hurt my ego. So what I did instead, and I choose never to stoop. He sounds like Satan in Paradise Lost, doesn't he? Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. So it's not that she didn't like him. It's not that she didn't look at him with smiling face. She did that. But who passed without much the same smile? But whoever passed received the same kind of smile. So how was I special? And if I wasn't special, how come she remains my wife? This grew. This was going on, happening day after day. I gave commands. And then I had to do something about it. So I gave orders. Then all smiles stopped together. So his orders led to the stopping of the smiles. Suggestive. We don't know exactly what orders he gave. But since he is saying that this is my last Duchess painted on the wall, and then he is saying as if she were alive, this means that she is not alive now. And this means that his orders are specifically about killing her. Imagine the reaction on this listener. What is he thinking at this moment? He is quiet, he is not talking. There, she stands as if alive. So now he has that portrait on his wall with the same kind of smile which he hated on her when she was looking at others. And he hated it so much that he hides that portrait behind a curtain which only he has the right to open. So he now has complete authority over her smile. He can control who is looking at her smile. This speaker is now addressing the listener directly. Earlier, he had asked the listener to sit and watch the portrait as he explains things to him. And now, probably that listener is kind of thunderstruck, bolted to his stool or whatever he's sitting on. So the speaker, he kind of shakes him out of his dizziness and says, Will it please you rise? Okay, get up now. We are done here. We'll meet the company below. So there are people downstairs. They are upstairs somewhere, maybe, walking down the stairs now in his private chamber or his library or a place where he keeps all these artifacts. So they're going to go down now, and he is instructing the whole thing to this messenger that, okay, get up, let's go down now. Who are waiting downstairs? Let's see. We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the count your master's known munificence. Munificence means generosity, when somebody is very open with gifts and things. Okay, so that is a generous person. So he is saying that this messenger's master, the count, is a generous person. Why is he talking about this count and his generosity? His ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. He is saying that I know your count is very generous, and whatever I'll ask in dowry will be given to me, will not be disallowed. Dowry, so he's talking about his wedding plans here. So this count he is talking about is going to be his father-in-law, and this messenger, he has come up and he is shown this picture of the last wife of this man who was murdered because she smiled. And then he says, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Well, I don't want much dowry. His daughter is all I want. But I know your master is very generous and I will be given a good dowry. Maybe the listener has started to walk at a faster pace now, trying to go away, get away from this insane man who has killed his wife and is actually flaunting it, and probably wants to go and warn his count. I don't know who are there downstairs. Maybe the count has come, maybe the daughter has come, maybe other people have come who need to be informed about the lunacy of this man so that he can stop them from going on with this engagement. So maybe he's rushing down. The Duke understands. He grabs his collar probably and says, let's go down together. Why are you rushing off? Nay, we'll go together down, sir. And then he is asking him to look at another object of art on the way. It's a bronze statue now. This listener is least interested. Definitely least interested. He wants to get away from this person, this madman. This madman doesn't know he's a madman, and he shows him the next artifact with the same kind of pride which he showed his wife's portrait with. And he says, notice Neptune though. So it's a statue of Neptune, the sea god, Roman god of sea, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity. So it's a very rare thing, and this artist, he made this specially for me, custom made for me, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Such pride. He is such an authoritative figure, and he prides in his possession of rare artifacts. A portrait of his dead wife, whose smile he can finally control. A bronze statue of a sea god taming a horse, another figure of control there, which only he possesses. It's a rarity. We do not get any verbal sound or any kind of response from the listener, but we definitely know what's going on in the mind of the listener right now. So, what are the things we should look at? First, why is it a dramatic monologue? And second, what kind of a character do we have here in this speaker? Dramatic monologue, as I have told you, is a kind of a combination genre. It combines drama with poetry. Now, what is the problem with this kind of combination? You see, drama is a different way of creative expression. Poetry is a different way. Why different? Now, I want to mention two words to you. Words which basically define the way drama is different from poetry. The first word is diegesis and the second word is mimesis. If you have some idea of Aristotle's Poetics, you would know that these are the things he mentions there. To give you a very simple idea, when a story is narrated or when there is a speaking persona, somebody telling you something, that something has happened or someone is like something, like every information is given to you by a narrator. Whenever there is a narrator, to put it in a simple way, it is called diegesis. So examples of diegesis, any kind of novel is a diegesis. Any kind of epic poetry is diegesis. Poetry is diegesis. Whenever there is a narrator narrating to you something, whenever some information is given to us about a character, that a character is good or bad, or a character is honest or dishonest, or when a scene is described to us, this is all narrative. Paradise Lost is narrative. We have Milton's voice speaking to us. Okay. Drama is mimetic. It has mimesis, imitation of an action. So while diegesis means telling, mimesis means showing. Something happens on the stage, you see that, and then you understand, you judge what kind of character is that. You have speeches from there, from that person. Macbeth is mimetic. Shakespeare doesn't tell you Macbeth is good or bad, Lady Macbeth is good or bad. You ask these questions from their actions, from their speeches. And you have dramatic elements inside diegesis where in moments where, let for example, Satan is speaking in Paradise Lost. His speech, his action inside that narrative is a piece of mimesis. Alright, so there is a dramatic element inside diegesis. But this is different. It is not, the speech of the Duke is not capsuled inside a general narrative. Here we have a person speaking to us on a stage which is defined for us. It's Ferrara. It's a place, real place, where a real person is standing, and this whole thing is so enactable. It contains not just words, it contains action. You can almost visualize the Duke, he is raising his hand, is pulling down the curtain, and then this man who is listening to the Duke, he is getting alarmed, he's raising from his place, he's trying to rush off, the Duke is grabbing the man and forcing him to look at a statue again. So you see a set of actions happening on stage, and there's no stage, it's poetry. So we have a blend of diegesis and mimesis together in this experimentation. And this is how Browning was taking poetry a step further away from romanticism. What is romanticism? It's extreme subjectivity. You see Wordsworth in his poem. You see Shelley in his poem. But trust me, you don't see Browning here. This is not Browning. I had told you about Browning. He would never kill his wife. It was because of him that his wife actually had a life. So this ability to establish a character which is not the author, which is not the poet, this is remarkable objectivity. And yes, we have seen this. We have seen this in Shakespeare, haven't we? Is Shakespeare Macbeth? Is Shakespeare Hamlet? Is Shakespeare King Lear? He cannot be so many things together, and he cannot be Prospero also at the same time. Those are extreme expressions of objectivity. This is objectivity. Browning is so away from his Duke that he is looking at the Duke like we are looking at the Duke, and this Duke is an independent entity on this imagined stage, on this imagined dramatic plane. And this is a dramatic monologue because it is objective, it has dramatic action, it has a silent listener, and this has a gradual development of story element in this. We have a story working out in front of us. And of course, there is an O. Henry-ish kind of twisted ending. We were expecting this kind of thing from the very beginning, but finally when he says that I killed her, I stopped her smiles, that is a climactic moment. So we have this miniature rise and fall, this miniature pyramidal structure, Act 1 exposition, where the Duke is kind of opening up that portrait in front of us, and then the rising action where he's talking about the different ways in which he got angry, the different ways in which his wife responded to others, which he didn't approve of. That's second act. Third act is the climax. He decided not to argue with her, and decided to kill her. And then the falling action where we have the reaction from the listener, and then finally resolution. I don't know if there's any resolution here, but there is kind of a disturbing end where we are left with this figure of Neptune taming a horse. A seahorse, not just a regular horse. So Neptune, the god of ocean, he is regulating, controlling a creature which belongs to his territory, the seahorse. The Duke wants to consider his wife as somebody who belongs to his territory, and he wants to control that persona within that territory. And if he couldn't control her, well, he'll simply convert her into a work of art which he can control indefinitely. This character of the Duke is definitely a very interesting one. As I have already told you, he's definitely a psychopathic, sadist person. But what makes him more chilling, what makes his crime more chilling, is the fact that he has no awareness of it. There is no understanding of the extent of his guilt. It's one thing to kill a person, it's one thing to commit a crime, but not to have an idea about the criminality of your action, not to have the understanding that you have committed a crime, and trying to justify it as the only thing you could have done. That is more criminal than the act itself. Because this Duke has no idea about the extent of his crime, it is a real possibility that he would perpetuate this, he would continue doing this with his next wife and the next wife and the next wife. And why just wives? He is so dominating. I'm sure he gives this air to everybody, and he wants to control everybody. Nobody's life around him is a happy and peaceful one if this is a person you have in front of you. So there is an absolute lack of understanding about crime and criminality. And the second thing which is very interesting about this Duke is that he is very cold. You have jealous husbands, all right, fine. Husbands jealous of their wives, looking at other men, maybe not looking at sunset. I have never come across a man who would be jealous of his wife for looking at a sunset. This is an extreme case, I guess. So this is not real human jealousy. This is more like he wants to be the center of attention. He wants his wife's world to, rotate around, revolve around him. And therefore, he is more like a pathetic person who is very insecure. He never feels that he is good enough for her. And that insecurity probably made him feel that she is not seeing him as the god of her life, the Neptune of her ocean. When I was talking about Lucretia, the real person on whom the story is built, she was married at 14 and she was, you can say, murdered at 17. And this Duke clearly looks pretty old enough to me. And this man is judging the smile on the face of a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, a teenager who has really tried to be happy in her life. She is married off to this serious man. We can't even begin to guess how suffocating the whole environment was for her, but she was trying to survive it by smiling, perhaps. And that was not allowed to her. Maybe this is a duke, but this is a man committing an act of domestic violence. And maybe that's why it's so relevant even today. The other theme which comes out of this whole poem is how women were objectified. And this is not just the Victorian times. It was before Victorian times, and it is well even today. Women are judged for things they wear. Women are judged for the smiles they give. Women are judged for things they drink. They are judged every moment. They are displayed, and then they are judged for being displayed. So now that the Duchess is painted and standing displayed on his wall, we can say that the wife is displayed on the wall. But when she was alive, wasn't she displayed then also? Was she more than an object then? No. Are women more than objects even now? Yes, to some extent, yes. We have come some way, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet, probably. This is super ironic because he is referring to his wife as his last Duchess, and he uses this emphatic pronoun, my last Duchess, sense of possession. So women as objects, women as possessions, and things that you can lock up. Who is writing this? A man. So yes, this is an objective, dramatic monologue, but somehow we realize that Browning could see these things at least. And that makes us feel how sensitive he was, and somehow makes us understand why his wife was probably that happy, why she was coming out of her sickness. Because this man, Robert Browning, he definitely could detect these things. The other theme which we can see here is his comment on aristocracy in general. Aristocracy here is presented as a liability, as a burden, as something which makes you less human, takes you away from real human emotions, real human relationships. This poem was published in 1842, before he met his wife, future wife. So we can understand that here we have a man who is very direct in his condemnation of false aristocracy or the hypocrisy of aristocrat people, and his presentation of women as commodities in the eyes of these aristocrats. And when is he writing this? When there is a queen on throne. Wow. The queen is ruling not just England, but practically half of the world. This is very interesting because Victorian age is about that extreme conservatism, and at the same time we have extreme experimentation too. Not just in Browning, but people like Christina Rossetti and that whole group of people who call themselves pre-Raphaelites. We're bringing in this idea of art for art's sake, take away moral element from literature. Look at art as art is. And here we have Browning experimenting with the very form of poetry. The last interesting thing which I want you to notice is the meter of the poem. This poem, although when I was reading it, it sounded like prose, right? As if I was reading a real conversation here. But this is written in rhyming couplets. See, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive, I call. That piece of wonder now fra Pandol's hands, worked busily a day, and there she stands. Now see, this is so very rhythmic. And when you scan this up, it gives you iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is the meter which is used heavily, or which was used heavily by writers of love sonnets. In sonnets by Shakespeare, Iambic pentameter is a standard meter for love poetry, for poetry which is written to please the beloved. And what is Browning using iambic pentameter in? He is using it in exposing the criminality, the inner psychology of a criminal. Where else do you find iambic pentameter? You find iambic pentameter in blank verse. There you don't have rhyme. You don't have these couplets. You have unrhymed iambic pentameter. And where did you find it? You found it in Paradise Lost by Milton. You found it in Macbeth, William Shakespeare in his plays in general, his tragedies in general. You found it in the mighty line of Christopher Marlowe. He is using that meter of iambic pentameter and taking up that idea of couplet from what? Alexander Pope's heroic couplets. What kind of a punch experiment is this? He is experimenting with not just the technicalities of meter, but with the emotions you associate with these meters. So this grandness of speech which is generated is set against the hypocrisy behind this grandness. This is Satan speaking to us. Browning is like a spark, People always feel that Victorian poetry is, well, a boring transition from romantic to modern. It's not. And it took like a century to really give Browning the kind of appreciation he deserves, because back then people were shocked by him. Because back then people always confused between the artist and the work of art. They thought that art has to have a moral end to it. They thought that this is not morally sound poem. But if this is not giving you a lesson in morality, this is not giving you a lesson in humanity, I don't know what does. Because the best way to teach is to show. And the best way to tell people what happens to a criminal is to show what happens to a criminal. So far as exams are concerned, you might be asked questions like, analyze this as a dramatic monologue. Second is the character of the Duke. And of course, the third question might be about the form of this poem. In all these answers, try to relate to all these concepts. And at the same time, maintain your focus. Focus on the question that is asked. Keep your first stanza, last stanza on the question that is asked, and in between you can kind of move around a bit on other aspects too, right? So the form, the content, the character, the expressions are all integrally connected to each other, and this connection is something that makes Robert Browning so very unique. I hope you have enjoyed today's class, and if you have any questions related to this poem, or if you want me to take up any other poem by Browning, do let me know in the comment section. And if you are feeling chilly that this poem is about a murder that has been committed, I don't know what you're going to say once you look at Porphyria's Lover, where we see murder live in action in the poem. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about that some other day. Till our next video, I hope you stay subscribed. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. See you all. Bye.